The world had made a habit of grand gestures, of charity dressed in glass and cameras. But sometimes a life tilted on its axis because someone heard 3 words and did something small and true. If this story moves you, please like and stay with it until the end. There's a quiet beat worth waiting for. Bianca stood between the aisles where the holiday displays clustered like bright, indifferent islands. Strings of lights hummed above the stacks of tins and plastic turkeys. A recorded carol looped through the speakers, too cheery for the cart that scraped the tile beside hers. Davi leaned against her hip, his small hand curled in hers. His shoe had a patch of darker fabric sewn clumsily over the sole, the thread the color of a faded sweater. He watched the light on the shelves like it was a promise he couldn't quite trust. "This year," Bianca said, and her voice was a low thing wrapped tight, "there's no feast." Davi blinked, one eyelid slow like a child measuring how much a word could hold. "No feast?" His mouth made a small O. "No turkey?" "No turkey," she answered. She kept her eyes on the list in her hand, on the numbers that refused to bend. She thought of the electric bill, the rent envelope she'd tucked under a plate, the leftover antibiotics for her mother that had become an odd, heavy silence after she died. There would be bread and eggs and maybe a small piece of chocolate if the numbers allowed. That was the promise Bianca gave herself. Keep the boy warm, keep the lights from going out, keep the pride intact. Jonas Oliver had not planned to be in that aisle. He had been on his way to pick up something for his own house, a decorative item he couldn't explain a need for, a final flourish to justify the guest list. He was in a coat that fit like a second skin and shoes that knew their purpose. His palms hardly left the leather of his wallet. He moved with the ease and quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being given the world. The supermarket lights caught in the glass fronts of his watch. He did not belong to the fluorescent cheer, and yet he lingered as one lingers at a painting. He saw the way Bianca's hands cradled the list, the way her back curved slightly so the cart protected her. He saw Davi's patched shoe and then the child's face, open and immediate, and something tightened in Jonas that had nothing to do with his dinner plans. It was a small animal thing. He noticed the contrast, the brightness of the commercial display, the careful, private arithmetic that had no audience. He had heard the words before, in headlines and speeches, give generously, and he had complied with press releases and tax forms. But that compliance had always been at 300 feet. Up close, a confession small as a breath took on a weight he had not expected. He watched as Bianca's lips pressed together. She scanned a price tag like it might be a lie. Davi gathered 2 measly chocolate bars into his fist as if guarding them from the world. At the register, the cashier scanned items with practiced indifference. A family ahead of them jostled good-naturedly over a novelty hat. The fluorescent lights hummed on. Bianca placed a pack of rice, a modest can of tomatoes, a small hunk of cheese, and the chocolate the child had clasped. She fished in an envelope for a few bills and set them on the counter. Her fingers trembled when she counted. When the total was announced, she made the same motion she had practiced countless times. Take out a breath, add, subtract, settle. The cashier's smile was trained. It didn't reach his eyes. He tapped at the register. Bianca stepped back as if to hide the furrow in her brow from Davi. "It's okay, Mommy," Davi said, in the clear, unashamed way of 5-year-olds who believed Santa would not let their mother be sad. Someone moved behind Jonas, a manager in a neat vest, lips thin with practiced hospitality. Jonas turned, an almost polite vacuum of interest, and found himself facing this employee who carried the easy sovereignty of someone who answered to many problems at once. "Sir," the manager asked, voice low enough not to disturb the carol, "would you like to purchase a gift card? We have a program." Jonas did not know why his hand went to his wallet. He did not know why he heard his own voice say, "Pay for that woman's groceries, all of them. Leave it anonymous. And add a panettone for the boy." The manager's eyebrows rose, then settled into a new shape, surprise read as discretion. "We can do that," he said. "We can put it through, and the woman will be told her purchase was covered. No names, no announcements." Bianca packed the rice into her bag with slow, careful motions. She counted twice, then set the bills down as if measuring the air. She had trained herself to refuse charity in public. It preserved something of the dignity she had kept like an old coin. When the cashier's small screen flicked, the manager whispered something to the woman behind the register. The screen reset. The cashier looked back at Bianca and said, "Ma'am, your purchase has been paid for." A flush moved over Bianca's face that was not simply shame, not only gratitude. It was relief braided with a stubborn refusal. "I can't," she began. Her hands tightened around Davy's small shoulder. "It's already done," the manager said gently. He slid, among the receipt paper, a small box wrapped in cellophane. A plastic panettone with a label that read "Decadence" in an absurd cursive font. A plain envelope lay beneath. The manager had placed a bright, childlike sticker on it without thinking, a small star that seemed to say, "This is for kids." Bianca let her fingers hover over the envelope, as if touching a map to an unknown place. Davy's eyes widened. He reached for the box like it might be a living thing. "For holiday," he declared, as if the word could call warmth into a cold room. Bianca held the panettone to her chest for a second, and then lowered her gaze. "Who?" she started. The manager met her eyes with a careful, non-judgmental patience. "Just somebody who wanted to help, ma'am." She nodded because she could not do anything else. She rolled up the sleeves of her jacket and lifted the bag. She said nothing about thanks that would have sounded like a debt. She walked out, Davy's hand in hers, the lights of the supermarket reflecting in her eyes. Jonas left minutes later. He walked out of the automatic doors into a night that smelled faintly of exhaust and wood smoke from a stand that sold roasted chestnuts. He had been thinking of his holiday gathering, how many would reply, which table would be set next to the fountain, but now those things felt small as novelty. He felt an odd, hollow ache. The map of his life was a set of rooms without someone to call home. Inside his chest something shifted. He felt a pang. He could not explain it with balance sheets. Romero was waiting by the curb, leaning against the car with the air of a man who had been paid to be patient. He watched Jonas without comment as he slid into the seat. Romero's eyes were practical, less interested in sentiment than in the weather and the best routes. "You didn't like the item you went for?" he asked as the engine sighed. "No," Jonas said. His hands cradled the steering wheel, though he had no desire to drive yet. Romero hummed. "You want to go back? Leave another donation?" He sounded mildly amused, not unkind. Jonas did not answer at first. He found himself thinking not about a press mention or an annual charitable ledger, but about a boy whose shoe had been patched with care. He pictured the panettone in Davy's hands, the way the small star sticker had landed like a claim. He pictured Bianca's face, tenacious, private, threaded with sorrow. He wanted to do more than cover a bill. He wanted to know whether the help had been useful without shattering the woman's dignity. At home, Jonas's apartment was a study in restraint. It breathed a curated silence, glass surfaces that kept their distance, a tree whose lights were perfect but small, because large things in his life had become theater. He set the bag he had bought, an object of design and expense, on a counter like an offering, and then sat down at his dining table that had never needed to be set for intimacy. He felt foolish and oddly exposed, like a man whose shirt came untucked. He could have called his assistant and arranged something anonymous through a foundation, written a check that would be assigned a line in a report. That would have been efficient and safe. Instead, the phone in his pocket felt suddenly heavy with the potential for a more awkward, real kindness. He canceled,
with a single curt instruction to an assistant, the holiday party planned for the following week.
Not because he did not want a room full of approval, he told himself, but because he wanted to see what it meant to give with no audience. The cancellation was a small, decisive cut. It saved hundreds of bottles and one phonied sense of importance. It began to free him. The next morning, Jonas returned to the supermarket. He told himself he did not know why. He had no plan beyond wanting to know. The manager recognized him with the polite memory of someone who recorded faces by their transactions. Jonas bought modest things this time. A plain knitted sweater in a child's size, soft, unpretentious, and a small box of chocolate truffles that he imagined would be too bitter for Davi. But he liked the idea that the sweets were honest sugar rather than theatrical confections. He asked the manager to pass them to the woman who had been at the register the night before. "She won't accept front-of-house charity," the manager said, lifting an eyebrow. "But I can leave them with the clerk. If you want to speak with her, we can give a note. But, sir, we don't share addresses." Jonas understood that. The world he occupied had protections and barriers. He did not want to breach those, only to offer something simple, hand-to-hand, no photos, no press release. "Leave the sweater and chocolates with her as a gift," he said, "and include a note. No name, no explanation. Just a cardigan for cold nights. Leave it in the bag with the groceries." The manager hesitated, then smiled with the sort of empathy that administration often cultivated. "We'll be discreet," he said. "People prefer that." Bianca found the small sweater folded atop her bulging shopping bag when she crossed the threshold of her building a little later. The sweater was a child's thing, gray and soft, the kind that smelled faintly of the store's cedar folding table. A note had been tucked beneath it on the tissue paper. No signature, no flamboyance. "For cold nights," it said, in simple block letters. There was no envelope, no phone number, no performance. Davi undressed the sweater with the solemnity of a ceremony, fingers tracing the knit like it might reveal a map. "It's soft," he said, pressing his cheek to the fabric with a child's immediate belief that comfort could be held. Bianca wrapped her arms around him then, one motion that fit like the sweater wrapped in warmth. That night she sat on the narrow sofa and looked at the small sweater on the table as if considering a relic. She had learned to measure kindness by its cost and its insistence. A panettone and a sweater and a paid grocery bill could be enough for one family to sleep easier for a week, and yet she also knew it could complicate things. There were men who gave and then expected gratitude measured in obligation. There were others who staged charity like theater. She would not let another person rearrange her life without her consent. She laid the sweater aside and folded the child's socks. She thought of her mother's hands, the ones that had taught her to sew a patch onto a shoe, and of the way tenderness had been taught by survival. Her throat tightened. She touched the envelope where the note had been and found nothing else. No instructions, no pressure. That particular lack startled her more than any speech would have. Davi slept with the sweater beside him like a talisman. He woke in the middle of the night and put his nose to it as if it might smell of someone who loved him already. Bianca sat at the kitchen counter and listened to the city breathe. She turned the note over in her hands as if it might bear a secret. She kept the note folded, not out of superstition, but as a private map of a new, quiet possibility. Jonas did not expect to think of the woman and the child again so often. He expected an emotional swell and then the tide to recede. Instead, the memory clung. He found himself choosing small, unfamiliar actions, buying ingredients for soup rather than a bottle of vintage wine, learning how to fold socks with a clumsy humility, sampling the children's section of a store like a man exploring a foreign island. He listened more than he spoke. He canceled engagements with excuses that smelled of truth. He let himself be the kind of man who could be late to himself, late to appointments, because his heart demanded a small apprenticeship in care. Curiosity turned to an awkward courage. He returned to the supermarket and asked again for the manager. And when the manager stepped out back to speak in the low privacy of the office, Jonas said, "I want to meet the woman, not in the store, not in a staged way.
I want to ask if she needs anything. I want to bring food. If she refuses, I will accept that." The manager's silence was an answer in itself. "I can't share personal information," he said finally. "But you can leave your card. We can give it to her if she wants to call. We can arrange to deliver something if she accepts it. We respect people's boundaries here." Jonas wrote his number on a plain card. He did not sign his surname. He tucked it into the pocket of the sweater he'd bought earlier and left it with the manager. "No obligation," he said. "No names, no announcements." When he walked away, he told himself he had finally done something honest. He had left a breadcrumb rather than a bridge. He had not demanded gratitude. He had not sought a photograph. He had placed one small thing in the world and stepped back. Bianca found the card the next morning when Davi insisted on trying on the sweater again. The card had been slipped into the sleeve, its edges soft from being folded. Her thumb brushed the digits. There was no flourish, no title, only numbers and a single initial, J. Bianca set the card on the kitchen counter and considered the geometry of it, a private invitation tossed into her life. She could call or she could not. She folded the card and put it in the jar that held coins for the bus.
She was not the sort of woman to be moved by mere gestures. She thought of trust like a pot of stew that needed time to simmer. Davi wondered aloud about the man who had given the sweater. "Maybe he is Santa," he said, "or maybe he is a wizard." "Maybe," Bianca told him, smiling at his simplicity, and meant it. She allowed the idea that a life might include unaccountable goodness without collapsing into fantasy. Jonas's hands were clumsy when he decided to go to the building where Bianca lived. He had debated polite ways, sending flowers, arranging for a delivery, but those seemed ornamental now. He wanted to see, to ask, to be held to the standard of a person who offers help in the same room as the one who receives it. He wanted to learn what it was to be quietly present. Ramiro parked 2 blocks away and waited in the car with an unreadable expression. He saw a man step out of the vehicle who had once been an instruction, a suit made of decisions. Now that man carried a paper bag with a modest loaf of bread and a thermos of soup, things chosen for practicality, not ceremony. Jonas's heartbeat surprised him with its speed. When he stood in front of the building and looked at the worn intercom, Jonas realized how small an act of courage it could be to press a buzzer. He hesitated, as if the metal box were a test. He pressed the number for Bianca's apartment and awaited a response. He rehearsed a sentence about boundaries and respect. He imagined Bianca opening the door and saying no. He imagined her asking who he thought he was. He imagined leaving and never seeing them again. The buzzer clicked. The pause stretched thin. Then a voice, guarded, not unkind, answered, "Yes?" Jonas cleared his throat. "My name is Jonas," he said. "I left something at the market for you. I brought soup. If you do not want me to come up, I will leave it at the door." There was silence on the other end, long enough for Jonas to catalog the foolishness of his life. He thought of the sweater, folded on a kitchen table. He thought of the panettone and the patched shoe. He felt exposed and honest in a way that had nothing to do with business. There was a small sound like a key turned in a lock. The door buzzed open. He climbed the narrow stairs with the bag in his hands, feeling each step register in his chest. The hallway smelled faintly of cleaning products and a candle someone had burned in winter to make the world feel less severe. The light above the stairwell was warm, not the supermarket's glare. He paused at the door, rehearsed one more time the simple thing he would say, and then raised his knuckles. He did not know what he expected. He did not know whether Bianca's no feast had been a door he deserved to knock on. He knocked and felt the sound answer back in him. The door cracked open, and, for a second, Jonas saw the world as if through the small lens of someone's life. A child's drawing taped to the inside of the door, a stray sock on the radiator, a small tree with a single string of battery-powered lights. Bianca stood in the threshold like someone who had rehearsed this moment for years. She had her hand on Davi's shoulder, her posture both protective and tired. Jonas could have turned and walked away.
He could have folded the bag back into a self that preferred to lodge compassion in checkbooks. Instead, he held out the thermos and the simple loaf. "No fanfare," he said. "I just wanted to know if it's okay." Bianca's eyes measured him like a watchmaker examines gears. She looked at the objects in his hands, at the simplicity of them, then back up at his face. There was a flicker of something, curiosity, caution, the faintest hint of recognition that some people meant what they did. "Why?" she asked, because people asked that when they needed to be sure. "Because you said there would be no feast," Jonas said. "Because I heard it. Because I thought maybe there should be soup." Davi, overhearing, peered past his mother's leg, hope leaking from somewhere clean. His gaze found Jonas's and held it with the frankness of a child who had not yet learned to hide hunger. Bianca considered the man. She considered the thermos and the loaf. She considered the card folded in her jar and the note that had come without strings. Her mouth softened around the edges. She could accept the gifts and nothing else. She could accept them and keep her boundaries. "You can leave them on the counter," she said at last, "but that's all. I don't want you to come inside, and my son, doesn't." "It's okay," Jonas interrupted gently. "I understand." He set the thermos down. The sound of it on the linoleum felt louder than it should have been. He caught a glimpse of the small tree at the window, its blue lights blinking with a shy kind of hope. The apartment smelled faintly of garlic and dish soap and the small, constant courage of people making do. He saw Davi's patched shoe poking from beneath the curtain where the boy had tucked it out of the way, and something inside him unclenched like a fist. Bianca closed the door a fraction, and then opened it again, as if testing the shape of an offer she could not afford to make careless. "You understand boundaries," she said. "You understand dignity?" "I think I'm learning," Jonas said, and the confession came out of him unpolished. "I want to learn." There it was, a bare human sentence. It said more than a donation. It said that he had room to change. Bianca's jaw eased. She gave him a nod that was not for the cameras or for any ledger. "Then leave the sweater I found on the table," she added, voice small. "And go. We'll be okay." Jonas hesitated. He wished to say more, to explain that his life had been full of things that did not fill. But the rules were hers. He bowed his head like a man who could accept a boundary as a gift. He turned to leave, and Davi stepped forward with a child's unavoidable honesty. "Wait," the boy said, and then he rummaged beneath his pillow as if summoned by the gravity of the moment. He produced a small rectangle of paper, all scribbled lines and a stick-figure family with a son and a crooked house. He offered it to Jonas as if offering a crown. "For you," Davi announced, "because you gave sweater." Jonas took the drawing with hands that tried not to tremble. The crayons had gone out of the lines like life sometimes did. The sun was a fierce, optimistic yellow. The stick figures had no faces, only circles of belonging. The paper smelled faintly of crayon and the dry, honest breath of a small boy's room. He turned the picture over, expecting nothing, but there, in the child's blocky handwriting, Davi had written his own name. The back of the paper had a smudge where a parent had wiped a handkerchief across a tear and then forgotten it. Jonas folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his pocket, as if keeping a fragile promise. He bowed again, said nothing because he had nothing of value to say at that moment beyond his gratitude, and left. Outside, the cold bit at his face like a reality check. He walked down the stairs with the drawing tucked near his heart and found Ramiro waiting in the car with that loyal, calm look. Jonas slid into the seat without speaking. The drawing lay between them on the seat like proof that something real had occurred that could not be measured. Ramiro glanced at it. "Is that for you?" he asked. Jonas touched the paper through his pocket. "In a way." As the car pulled away, Jonas looked back at the building until the angle swallowed it whole. He had expected to feel relief, perhaps a reward. Instead, he felt an unformed resolve, like something beginning to grow in the dark. He had given away some of his certainty and been given back an unexpected responsibility. To be consistent, to be humble, to keep showing up in ways that honored Bianca's agency and Davi's safety. He ran a hand over his jacket and found, in the soft lining, a small patch where the sweater had brushed his sleeve. He thought of the panettone, of the grocery receipt, of a boy who had offered a drawing without pretense. He felt, for the first time in a long while, the strenuous, quiet hope of someone learning to live with less performance and more presence. There would be consequences he could not foresee, skepticism from his circle, questions about motives, the awkwardness of crossing class lines. There would also be small, honest things to learn. How to cook soup for a family in a pan the size of a heart. How to sit quietly while a woman keeps her dignity in the face of an offer. How to be patient enough for trust to rise like yeast. Jonas thought of that, and the thought felt like work he did not mind doing.
Behind him, the city's lights blurred into a smear of warmth and cold. He folded the paper tighter in his pocket and pressed his palm to the outline of the child's sun. He had 5 minutes, once, to hear a sentence he could not forget. He had a choice now, and he resolved, with an almost comical solemnity, to accept it. He asked Ramiro to drive by the small grocery on the corner again, not because he needed to be seen, but because he wanted, irrationally, to watch the door where Bianca had stood. He wanted to see if she would place something on the tiny tree, a decision that would speak of hope. The car rolled past, and the window framed the warm little rectangle of the apartment like a theater stage that had been entrusted to the ordinary. Jonas held the drawing in his hand as if it were a talisman. He had not rescued anyone. He had done something small and human. It was enough to begin. He did not yet know whether Bianca would allow him to be a part of their life beyond a thermos and a folded sweater. But as the car eased back into the stream of evening traffic, Jonas felt the smallest, most stubborn light flicker on inside him, a light he had not bothered to cultivate in years. He hoped it would be neither show nor spectacle, but steadiness, kept lit by the repetition of small, unobtrusive kindnesses. And somewhere in the apartment over the corner store, Davi slept with the sweater near his pillow, and dreamed, perhaps, of a feast he would have someday. Bianca typed a message into her phone and deleted it before sending. She placed the card Jonas had left into a drawer, near the spare keys, not because she planned to call, but because she liked knowing the option existed like a secret window. Jonas did not have a plan beyond the next small step. He would learn, or he would fail, or he would be only a brief warmth in a winter that went on. None of that mattered as much as the fact that he had crossed a line he had allowed himself to fear. He had spoken less and listened more. He had left anonymity present and surrendered the urge to rewrite the world for applause. The car turned a corner. The city's glow swallowed the small, promising rectangle of Bianca's home, but the drawing in Jonas's pocket held its own light. He fingered the folded edges until the crayon left a smudge on his thumb. He thought of how little it had taken. 3 words in a supermarket, a sweater, a thermos, a child's drawing. He thought of how large the consequences could be if he let them. Be steady rather than showy. He did not yet know how to be the man who would return tomorrow without awkwardness. But he wanted, with an intensity that surprised him, to find out. He slept poorly that night, the drawing under his pillow like a small, weighty prayer. In the morning, he would make soup again. He would learn how to make it without consulting a cookbook like a map. He would practice listening to questions he could not answer with money. He would let himself be quiet and be present. He would go back. And then he would press the buzzer again. He would wait for a voice to fill the silence between them. He would learn the discipline of not taking. But those were plans that belonged to the days ahead. For now, with the drawing safe in his jacket and the city's lights drifting like a constellation he could not yet name, Jonas let himself feel something like gratitude, messy, human, and real. He drove on, the car carrying a man who had heard 3 words that had the power to rearrange a life.
He kept his hand on the paper in his pocket until the edges softened beneath his skin. At the corner, a small tree blinked and went on blinking, indifferent to the scale of the world. Inside a modest apartment, a mother folded socks, and a child slept with crayon-scented dreams. Between them, a stranger had placed a sweater and a thermos, and, in doing so, had begun a small undoing of his own life. He had 5 minutes to hear a phrase, and then the rest of his life to try to honor it. He leaned his head against the window and watched the city pass, carrying with it the echo of 3 words that had changed everything he thought he knew about himself. The drawing pressed against his chest like an imperative. He would not be a savior. He would only be present. He would let the consequences unfold. He would return. He woke before the sun had a name, with the drawing still pressed to his ribs where his chest had kept it overnight. The city was a pale wash through the curtains, the kind of gray that made the kitchen clock look urgent. He moved with the careful slowness of someone who had learned some small new reverence for ordinary things. The way a pot sat on the stove, the tilt of a ladle, the sound a wooden spoon made against enamel. He had no cookbook out this time, only the memory of the soup he had made the night before, and the intention to make it without consulting paper, to trust that the work itself could teach him. Water hissed, onion browned. He thought about the feel of the sweater that had warmed a sleeping child's shoulder, not a trophy, not a performance. He sliced carrot with a steadiness that steadied him in return, tasting and adjusting as he went. Salt, pepper, a squeeze of lemon because the world needed a little bright. He ladled the soup into a thermos with the same ceremonial care as a vow. When he sealed it, the thermos felt like a promise. He dressed slowly. He thought about boundaries, his and theirs, and tried to imagine how to present himself without the old swing toward spectacle. He had been the sort to imagine help as showy, dramatic, something that would announce his goodness and erase his smallness. Today, he tried on a different idea. Help as patience, as repetition, as returning until returning ceased to be an event and became a presence. He walked with the thermos and the folded drawing in his coat pocket like talismans that asked only to be ordinary. The city smelled of wet asphalt and bread ovens warming. He did not rehearse a speech, only a few plain things he might say if the buzzer answered, "It's Jonas," and "I brought some soup." That was enough. He had to leave the rest to the shape of the moment. He pressed the buzzer and waited, the sound like the start of an exam. The buzzer answered with a voice, Bianca's voice, that careful, guarded thing, a beat slower than the machine's chime. "Who is it?" he said, as if he were announcing himself before a group of strangers who might choose to let him in. I brought more soup. I know it's early." There was silence, the kind that holds its breath before deciding whether a curiosity is permitted. "You don't have to," she began. "I know," he interrupted, gently. "I don't want to make trouble. I just wanted to bring it by. No speeches, no explanations. If you want me to leave it at the door, I will." Something in his voice persuaded her. Perhaps it was the lack of pleading. Perhaps it was the rawness that had no performance to prop it up. The lock buzzed. The door opened a crack, a sliver of light and apartment smell, socks and coffee, and the faint musk of crayons. Bianca stood there with her hair in a loose knot, a sweater hanging from one arm as if she had been interrupted folding it. Her face registered surprise, then that quick appraisal that parents gave strangers in the hallways of their privacy. Is he safe? Is he trouble? Does he want to undo what we try to hold together? "You're early," she said. "I didn't want to be late," Jonas said, holding up the thermos like an offering and, under his breath, the drawing. "I thought he'd like some soup before school." Bianca's eyes shifted for a fraction to the sketch of a sun and a square house that had already begun to soften at the crease from where Jonas had folded it. Her expression softened too, but the guard did not fall all the way. "Come in," she said, and stepped aside. The apartment was small and arranged with the economy of people who must ration surfaces: a table with mismatched chairs, a small sofa that had seen better years, a bookshelf with children's picture books on the lower shelf, and a stack of bills, envelopes, and a paperback novel that was bookmarked and half-read on the top. A line of tiny socks hung over a radiator like pennants. Davy stirred on the couch, the sweater Jonas had left half in the child's reach. He blinked awake, eyes wide and immediate, the kind of attention that belongs to children before the world teaches them to resist strangers. "Davy," Bianca murmured, "you slept with Jonas's sweater again?" Davy held the sweater to his cheek like a talisman, and rubbed his thumb across the crayon smudge on the sleeve. He did not remember everyone who had been kind to him. He only remembered the warmth itself. He blinked at Jonas and smiled, the kind of smile that slid between defenses like light through a crack. "Davy," Bianca murmured, "you slept with Jonas's sweater again?" Davy held the sweater to his cheek like a talisman, and rubbed his thumb across the crayon smudge on the sleeve. He did not remember everyone who had been kind to him. He only remembered the warmth itself. He blinked at Jonas and smiled, the kind of smile that slid between defenses like light through a crack. Jonas sat at the edge of the table, careful to keep an appropriate distance, his hands folded around the thermos now like a small animal. "I made something," he said. "If you don't want it, I'll take it back. No harm." Bianca watched him for a long moment, as if reading the back of a page. "You don't have to keep explaining," she said finally. "People don't usually come back when they do things like that." "No," Jonas agreed. "I know. I don't want to be a person who comes back for credit. He stopped. Words would either sound contrived or make a mess. He put the thermos between them. "Just soup. And if you want me to leave, say so, and I'll go." The vulnerability of that request startled her. She had been ready, earlier, to measure him against every shape of charity she'd seen come through the building. The glossy volunteers with brochures, the men with long-winded plans, the ones who made you feel grateful, like a favor. Jonas did not ask for gratitude. He only asked to do something ordinary. She poured a bowl and watched him as he did not rush to fill the space with answers. She watched him listen when Davi spoke about a rocket he had seen in a book, when the child insisted the sun in his drawing was super yellow, and that the house was for all of Jonas's friends. The child kept saying, "for all of Jonas's friends," like a spell that might conjure more good things into being. Jonas smiled then, real and small and brimming, and the motion broke a surface tension in Bianca's posture. "You don't have to stay long," she said. "We have school in an hour, and it's messy right now." "I understand," Jonas said. "I'll be quiet." They ate in a way that learns to make room for each other's silences. Davi slurped loud and proud. Bianca told a story about a colleague who brought pastries to work and forgot the change. And Jonas listened and asked a question at the edges, never intrusive, always returning the ball to them. When Bianca spoke about nights she worked overtime, he did not offer solutions that required expertise. He only said, "That sounds hard," and meant it. She did not need him to fix the payroll or the shifting hours. She needed eyes that acknowledged the cost. At one point, Bianca asked, "Why did you do it? The sweater? The thermos?" Jonas hummed, thinking of 3 words that had rearranged him in the supermarket, a phrase that had landed lightly but with the weight of a hinge. He could tell her about his life of careful, performative good deeds that had left him hollow, or the loneliness he had made art of, but he chose a smaller truth. "I was tired of watching my life be a headline," he said. "I wanted something that didn't make noise. I wanted to see if I could be small and steady." "And did it feel like anything?" Bianca asked. Fork paused in midair. "It felt like a beginning," Jonas said. "Like when you first learn to keep a plant alive. You don't know if it'll live, but you water it again the next day." Bianca laughed, a real, soft thing. "That's a terrible metaphor," she said, and then, softer, "but it's better than most." There was an honesty in the room now that came from the lack of theater.
Jonas did not talk about repentance or redemption in big terms. He simply sat in the shape of a person who had come to do the small thing again. He learned, over bowls and interrupted threads of conversation, some of the practicalities of their life. Bianca's shifts left her thin on evenings, the school bus left from a corner 2 blocks over. Davi's appetite could be astonishing and sudden. She also told him, without dramatics, about the way the heating in the building stuttered in February and how the landlord sent letters that read like warnings. Jonas nodded and began to take these things into account with the same methodical humility he used when he was learning to make soup. Time slid, the bowl went empty. Jonas packed the thermos back into his bag and folded the drawing, smoothing its creases with gentle fingers. He did not offer to stay to do dishes because such offers could feel like entry points to a neighbor's home they had not invited into. He asked instead, "Can I come by tomorrow?" Bianca's face closed for a beat, a small lock clicking shut. "You don't have to," she said, testing the limits again. "You shouldn't make your life about us." "I know," he said. "I won't. Would you like me to? I can come by sometimes. If you want. If you don't, I won't be offended." He left room for her to refuse. The bravery of refusing to make the request a debt was not lost on her. She considered the ways people could attach expectations to kindness. She also looked at Davy's open face and saw how quick and pure his gratitude was. "Tomorrow," she said finally, "if you don't mind." Davy, who had been watching the exchange like a jury, clapped his hands. "Jonas is my friend," he declared, as if declaring the world anew. Jonas laughed, a small, relieved sound. He rose to go. Before he left, Bianca hesitated and, quietly, asked, "Why did you keep the drawing?" Jonas felt the weight of the question, and it was not just about paper. "Because," he said, slowly, "it reminded me that the world isn't all set pieces. Sometimes it's a sun that's super yellow and a house drawn with a purple door. I wanted to remember that." She watched him fold himself back into the street, his figure framed by the hallway light and the ordinary pulse of a building waking up. On the sidewalk, the city breathed cold. Jonas walked without the swagger of someone who had done charity. He walked like someone who had learned that smallness could be a practice. He did not puff himself up with the illusion of having fixed anything. He had only placed a thermos on a table and been present to a family for an hour. That had felt already like a miracle. Over the next days, his movements became a new kind of habit. He learned the route to the corner store that had the best bread for soaking into soup. He learned the rhythm of Bianca's schedule and when Davi would arrive home with cheeks dewy from the day's fresh air. He developed small rituals, a knock of 3 soft taps because he and Bianca found that 3 taps was firm but not intrusive, a way of greeting that respected thresholds. When he arrived, he often brought nothing more than a willingness to sit, to tie shoelaces, to listen when Bianca wanted to tell him about the microaggressions of her job. Sometimes he brought candies Davi liked. Sometimes he brought nothing at all. He learned to read the apartment's mood and to yield when space was needed. At times, he failed. Once, he overstayed on a Saturday morning, thinking that laundry could be shared like burdens. Bianca's patience thinned. She needed a morning alone to catch up on errands. She told him gently but directly that she appreciated the help but needed time they had not been offered. Jonas left with a chastened, grateful heart, learning the shape of boundaries as if they were another recipe to master. He apologized and did not make explanations that sounded like defenses. His humility tasted like a fresh thing in his mouth. Neighbors began to notice the pattern. A man who came in the mornings and left in the afternoons, not a do-gooder with flurries of publicity, but someone who lingered in the edges of a life. Some looked at him with suspicion, others with curiosity. He became part of the building's texture. The young couple whose dinners he sometimes helped with a casserole. The old woman who shared stories about the neighborhood's history, and, once, about a boy who had taken a wrong turn and been given a second chance by an adult who had chosen to keep showing up. These stories Jonas absorbed like spice. Bianca, too, began to change in small increments.
She allowed him to help with Davi's school projects and even handed him a glue stick one evening with a look that said, "Care cautiously accepted." She did not invite him to all the details of their lives, neither of them had surrendered to that. But she began, in small gestures that betrayed trust, to place his drawing, the one he had first left and retrieved, on the refrigerator with a magnet, beside Dottie's homework and a postcard from a distant aunt. It was not a shrine. It was a part of the domestic landscape now. One rainy afternoon, as thunder threaded itself through the city's bones, Bianca knocked on Jonas's apartment door. He had not expected visitors, and his place showed it. A cup half full with tea, a sink that had not been emptied, a sweater on the back of a chair. He wiped his hands and opened the door, to find Bianca with Davi, the child's hair damp and his eyes bright. "I have a favor," she said. Her voice had the same guardedness it had when he'd first rung her buzzer, but under it was a note that sounded suspiciously like request.
"My landlord is sending someone tomorrow to check the heating. They'll need someone to sign so that the repair can go through. I'm scheduled to be at work. Could you—" "Of course," Jonas said without thinking. He saw, in that instant, how ordinary trust multiplies. He realized, with a strange little delight, that he had begun to be the kind of person who could be asked to do mundane things and would accept them gladly. It was not heroic, it was domestic. It felt right. When he went to sign for the heating check the next day, he had a small moment of absurdity in the elevator. A man who had once sought public applause, now being asked to endorse a radiator fix. He signed the paper with a pen that left a neat, modest scrawl. It was enough. The repair was scheduled. Bianca called that evening to say the man had fixed the radiator and that the apartment felt less like a winter cave. She laughed, and the sound warmed Jonas in a way that had nothing to do with press releases or accolades. There were times when Jonas's past habits reared, small and hungry. He found himself, on occasion, wanting to document good deeds, a photograph of a steaming bowl, a note posted online about kindnesses done. Each time he had an urge, he remembered Bianca's face when she had set the thermos on the table, without fanfare. Private warmth is what she wanted. He stopped himself. He came to see that real change did not require witnesses. One evening, months after the first thermos and the first night, Davi sat on Jonas's lap at the park and pointed to a kite the color of a bright flag. "Jonas," he said solemnly, "you are my friend." A simple sentence, but it felt like a verdict and a benediction all at once. Jonas kissed his forehead, tasting an old fear in the back of his mouth and a new tenderness at its crown. He wanted to reply something grand, but that would have been a return to theater. Instead, he said, plain and true, "I am your friend, yes." As time went on, Jonas discovered that the practice of returning, of being small and steady, reshaped not only his relationship with Bianca and Davi, but with himself. He began to notice the fissures in his life that had once been hidden by voluble generosity, relationships he'd used as stage sets, money spent to buy absence's applause. Those things did not disappear amid the quiet domesticity, but they dulled at the edges. He learned to sit in the quiet and listen to the hum of his own motives. Bianca, too, began to rearrange some private pieces. She started doing small things she hadn't allowed herself time for. Teaching Davi to tie his shoes on a Monday morning when he was impatient, letting Jonas hold the canoe steady at a neighborhood river when she found herself short-handed, accepting an offer of help with a flat tire without turning it into a lecture. Each concession was an experiment in trust. Neither of them claimed to have fixed the other. No one was transformed in a single swoop. But the house on the refrigerator, that imperfect sun and the purple door, began to stand beside a calendar of dentist appointments, a note about an upcoming school fundraiser, and, tucked behind them all, a faded receipt for a loaves-on-sale supermarket find that Jonas had been trawling for. The ordinary accumulation of care started to look like a life. And Jonas, who had slept poorly the night after his first visit and pressed the drawing to his chest like a prayer, began to sleep with less alarm and more presence. He still had nights when his mind leapt to the spotlight, conjuring scenes in which noble acts were applauded.
Each time, he would remind himself of the smallness he had promised: soup, presents, quiet visits. He would fold the craving for applause into the pocket of his coat and go knock on a familiar door. One afternoon, months later, he found himself again at the corner grocery, where it had all begun, the world humming in ordinary frequencies. He watched the tiny tree by the stoop where Bianca and Davi lived. Its lights blinked without regard to the interior economies of human hearts. He kept the drawing in his jacket for no reason other than habit, a relic of the night that had unlatched something in him. He thought of beginnings and of how sometimes the smallest choices set trajectories that a person could not then predict. He did not claim any grandness about the acts he had taken. He knew the truth of that now. There were no absolutes in a life made up of ordinary days. But he also knew, with a modest stubbornness, that steadiness changes the world in increments, like grains of salt in a pot of soup. He had 5 minutes to hear a phrase and years to try to honor it. He had begun to return. He pressed the buzzer, out of habit rather than necessity, and waited for the familiar voice that had once been a threshold and was now, in its own small way, an invitation.